All right, we're recording. So, let me check the
You can talk this time.
Check the
check,
sound.
check.
Can you
All
hear
right.
me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you, Sabine.
Check, check, check. Hey.
Chickadee
How's
chick
How's it
check.
going? Right on.
All right, so tell us about you. Who are you? What instruments do y'all play? How long y'all been in? What's going on with this Disenchanter?
I'm Sabine. I play guitar and I sing. And Disenchanter. And this is Joey. He plays bass. What's going on with Disenchanter? Right now we're just maintaining. We're just thinking about, we've released an album 4 years ago or so, and it's time for some new stuff. Looking forward to kind of creating some new music, and
Sounds right, new material.
yeah, it's time.
Yeah.
Sorry, are you recording right now?
We are not recording.
No.
We have a couple new songs. We just released a song. So we're just kind of like doing our thing. Kind of like working in. We had some lineup issues.
Yeah, so
We had some drummer issues and kind of swapped around some members and are kind of dealing with that.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty integral part of the band. So kind of hard to write the new material
How many
without
drummers?
without a drummer. We've gone through. How many have we had?
Yeah.
We have taken out on the road more and done shows with probably like six or seven drummers now.
Mm-hmm.
And all of them have been really good drummers, for the most part, generally speaking. And just whether or not, I think Stoner Doom is a certain genre that you have to have a lot of feel for, and you have to click with your other bandmates. And for whatever reason, it just didn't click with any of those members. So we just keep moving on and trying to do it. When we did our first shows, we didn't have a drummer. So we did like the first 4 shows without a drummer, but I just don't think it translates.
It doesn't
anymore.
translate. Yeah. I mean,
We can do it.
now
but-
that there's the sound with the drummer, it's really a piece that's missing.
Yeah, it's a big part
From
of it,
it,
I think.
yeah.
So it's kind of hard to move away from that. But we're working in maybe some new songs and maybe come out. We already have shows booked out through next year, so we'll probably just run those shows and then start working on new tunes. Hopefully we'll move forward with that.
Yeah.
So,
That's the plan.
Yeah.
Yep.
what's your connection with the Doomed and Stone? How long have you and Billy Goat been working together?
So we started Disenchanter in 2011 in California. We had been in Portland for a few years, and we had a band going, and this was like, I had a band going. I was in a band between 2005 and 2010 in Portland, and that was like MySpace days. We moved back to California for like a year. This was right around the time Red Fang put out that video for Prehistoric Dog. And we had a band in 2011 down in California where Sabine was singing, and it was basically this kind of music, stoner rock. We were trying to put something together. And then we came back in 2012, and this was right around like, MySpace was dying and there was Facebook. So I had met Billy Goat probably just like on Facebook around 2012 from his Doomed and Stone blog, because there was like, on Facebook, it was pretty new, and there weren't that many blogs on Facebook at that time. There was like Doomed and Stone and probably The Obelisk and a few others. Like there was like more playlist. It was more like
It was like a podcast
podcast
kind
type
of thing,
stuff.
and then like on
Soggy Bog of Doom
and then
stuff.
and then on the weekends he would do like, I'm taking requests,
Melissa would do her show.
Yeah.
And we didn't know where they lived or anything, it was just like there was Doomed and Stoned on Facebook, and
Yeah.
people were on it, but I think I get a little more personal, so I'm like, I get to know the people, and then figured out he was from Eugene, and I'm talking about Billy Goat, who's the creator of and editor-in-chief, I guess, of Doomed and Stoned.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, we talked on Facebook, and he said he'd come to Portland a few times, but he didn't really know anybody, and just kind of, he'd come up to see shows. And this is 2012,
13?
so it wasn't, there were a lot of bands when we came back in 2012, a lot more bands than there were when we left.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't crazy like it is now, where you didn't have touring bands coming through. You know what I mean? Back then, you didn't have as many touring bands
Not
coming
as
through
much,
town. I don't think the whole scene hadn't heated up as much as it is now. And Billy would, and then so Billy came up to some show. I can't remember exactly what show, but I think we first met him personally at the Portland Metal Winter Olympics, I believe, because we have that photo of him.
Yeah, it was either that or there was a Slabtown show that he showed up at.
To film?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was one of those two. I don't think they were far apart from each other.
Yeah. And then he came up, and I'm kind of, at that point in time, 2012, 13, I was very social butterfly-ish in the scene.
Ish.
I knew everyone, and
Yeah.
I didn't know everyone. Like, I didn't know all the cool people or anything, but I knew, like, everyone who was relatively local and playing in bands and stuff. And I brought Billy up, and I was like, hey, here's to every band that didn't know him yet, I'd introduce Billy. And then even when Billy first did his comp, I remember talking to him a lot about his first Doomed and Stoned in Portland comp that he did. He messaged me, and we kind of hashed out bands, which ended up being like, our view of it in the beginning was like, yeah, let's do this, but it was really his. It was totally his. And it was like, let's do this, but he knew he couldn't go too big with it because he wasn't that big yet. He wasn't that established yet. But then it blew up into like from 30 bands to 60 bands to like 80 bands or something. And all the bands that I think Billy... he and I both would probably agree that some bands at that point in time when he first did it wouldn't have done it. It wasn't a big enough thing. But it blew up into something bigger. And then all the bands that we would have never asked to be on it kind of wanted to be on it. And at that point in time, I mean, that was it. The Doomed and Stoned comp came out, and that was like the big change from my outside perspective for Doomed and Stoned. Because that's when like that Doomed and Stoned comp came out, and the bigger, more established bands kind of almost wanted to be on it then, which was sort of unheard of for like free comps, like these bands that already had albums out at that time were going to be willing to hop on a free comp. And then it ran into this whole tech issue of like, we had to make sure it was free because he couldn't make money off it because there were all these other bands that were on labels, and some labels got involved about whether or not he could use the music. And then it became, I think, a level of awareness, thing. A level of awareness evolution where it was like, holy shit, there's shit to deal with. There's things besides just taking your buddy's music and throwing it up on a comp or doing your thing. There was actually a responsibility to like, I got to make sure I know the tech side of it. I have to deal with the legal aspect. There's actually labels with some of these bands that have rights to music and shit. And then people started like, I think that's like the beginning of the bigger pop of the scene.
We all learned a lot.
Yeah, and then
just through that,
within like weeks, there were like how many other blogs, right? So that was kind of the history, I think, of that early stage of the Facebook blog. When Doomed and Stoned was there, the Obelisk was there, and a few other ones. So that's our relationship with Billy. We've gone back and forth with him. We've stayed at his house. He's come up for shows. We've gone down there and seen him at shows. He does a lot of the videotaping and local shows and stuff. I know he's really busy outside of his blog as well. And the other thing I was going to say about Billy was we owe him a lot because he helped curate a stage at Psycho Las Vegas in 2016. So really he got a lot of us and a few other Portland bands essentially on that bill. And he's allowed me to do local Portland kind of Doomed and Stoned showcases for usually local Pacific Northwest bands from Seattle, Eugene, this whole kind of run Portland. But once in a while there'll be a touring act that hops on the bill too if I can find someone who's coming through town, which is ideally leading up to doing a proper Doomed and Stoned fest in Portland. But that's a pretty big responsibility and a big undertaking. He knows that, I know that, so I've been doing these smaller things, which is something he allows me to do, and I think it's been really fun, and I think it's kind of in the vein, like I said, we first met him at these things called the Portland Metal Winter Olympics, which was like a local Portland kind of
Battle of the
Bands, tongue-in-cheek, 3-month-long thing, where it was like, it was put together by a Portland promoter. I mean, I could probably just tell you, it's put together by Nate Carson, and it takes local bands who are new. You have to be a new band, so you can't be like somebody who's been around forever and established or had done this before, or probably if you're touring or signed, you're not really technically eligible. But
it was showcasing
newer bands. Mm-hmm. So you'd have 2 new bands show up and they'd fight, and then you'd have a lineup of judges that night only who were drinking and partying and hanging out, and they'd only be there for that night, and they'd rate you on 3 different categories, which were kind of funny. sort of. I mean, they were legit, but it was also kind of fun. And then Nate would add up the scores and come out and tell everyone who won. And then you go on, right? And at the end, whoever won there was a 3-band battle at the end for first, second, and third place, and you won different things. And we ended up winning second place. There were some dropouts on the there was dropouts, and it was fun. It was Portland.
Yeah,
and the judges
fun.
changed every show, so you didn't know who the judges were going to be ever, and they were kind of like, you just never know who you'd get. They might just not like your shirt or something, that could have happened, or they just did like your shirt, and so you get points for that, who knows, whatever, the type of gear you used. But songwriting, performance, that was all part of it. Mm-hmm. So in the vein of that, I tried to do, in the vein of that feel, that Portland kind of local, grassroots, open to everyone DIY feel, I've tried to do these Doomed and Stone showcases, and I'd love to include everyone, which isn't always possible. And there's, how many shows can you do, and how many bands can you do? And I don't want to be a full-time booker. I do it seasonally, so I can't book everyone. So there's like a waiting list, sort of. And I know what it is. I know who's playing. I know who's local, but that's been my Billy Goat. Try to tie in Billy Goat in Portland and Doomed and Stone because it's also regional here, and I feel like that's important to highlight. It's not just I never knew he was from the area until we met him, really.
Yeah.
Do you think that Doomed and Stone is going to be is it nationwide yet? Like, is it big on the East Coast as it is over here in the PNW?
I don't think it's fair to look at internet phenomenon and look at it as big here or big there. I think Doomed and Stone is it's regional here, it's from here, but it's international. Anyone who's on Facebook who's into this type of music can go right to Doomed and Stone, and probably most of them know about it.
Most know about it.
Yeah, I think Doomed and Stone, the Obelisk, to me, Doomed and Stone and the Obelisk are like probably the two go-tos, and there's a ton of others, but really and they might have even been around a little before Doomed and Stoned or after, but it might just be the name, it might be the way that Billy's people create relationships. It may be that they are from, that Billy's here and that there's this West Coast kind of goofiness to it. You know what I mean? West Coast has kind of a goofy gullibility to it where we're like, we don't know what we're doing, fuck it, let's just do some stuff. Unlike others, when you go east, I think there's more experience. They've been there longer. They've dealt with, you know what I mean? Even if there's not as much stuff like there is here, it's a little bit more like, there's fewer people. It's not as crazy. It's not as chaotic and crazy. There's fewer people most other places we've gone. Mm-hmm. Even when we've hit Chicago or wherever. Only the East Coast seemed as intense, traffic-wise and stuff. And then I would say that the Portland scene, we're pretty saturated here. We've been doing it, if you name Yob and Witch Mountain, for 20 years. And when you look at the U.S. and what other places have been doing this traditional stoner doom sound for that long, first thing that pops in my mind is Maryland. So you have all this shit going on in Maryland and all this shit going on in Portland. Totally different cultures, but as far as the bigger U.S., similar because they're coastal and they have there's this busyness. I didn't think Maryland was as busy as the West Coast. It's just, there's so many people.
It's pretty busy.
There's a crush of people here and it's a lot diverse. It's diverse too, We've never been to New York or anything. So I don't know that Billy Goat's or that Doomed and Stoned is bigger anywhere other place. I'm sure they have a pretty big presence in Europe because he has a lot of correspondence from Europe. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's bigger here than he is other places.
Right, but he is none on the because I think
he's known.
Speaking of the Delaware thing, I've seen that the Delaware is that is that is the East Coast Portland. You know how we're big Doomed and Stoned here?
Totally.
Over there in Delaware, they've got a bunch of bands out there too that are, probably need to make that's a crisscross through the.
It's a long crisscross. We just did it twice actually.
But they're pretty saturated out there.
If we're talking about bands out there like The Obsessed and St. Vitus and all this stuff, we're talking about some pretty heavy, old school bands that set a tone.
Sure.
You know what I mean? That East Coast sound for this style. And it's not something that I recognized at first because we were totally into that southern rock, kind of desert rock, Caius, Corrosion of Conformity, the South, Down, and stuff like that. We were really into even the Sword, Austin, that's all the South. And then you have the Portland Yob and that heavy Witch Mountain type of sound.
Which
and
is
then you have
slower
the East.
doom, right? Dum,
Yeah, because it's not a stoner. So you have the stoner rock belt down there, kind of. Then you have the doom over here, and then you also have the doom over here. Both these areas are all cloudy and gray and shit and stormy, and these guys are all out in the desert and shit. So you have like this whole other like desert stoner, and then you have the doomy, dirgy, dark winter here. And to me, that's simplifying the whole thing completely, but you can see like 1995 corrosion of conformity with Pepper and shit like that, or like 98 Down, and then the Sword, and all that kind of stuff. And then I think I mean, what are you gonna do? It's a mess. There's so much mix. Stoner Doom has become, we were just talking about this earlier, how Stoner Doom isn't really like, the whole genre thing isn't really fair anyway, in general, right? Because you're dividing.
There's
all
so much
these genres.
crossover.
There's
now.
so much crossover now that's like, I think you were even mentioning earlier about all, like, in order to really survive in a way successfully, you kind of have to cross over to these different, or I forget exactly what you were mentioning about crossing over from punk and like even
thinking,
pop or country
like,
and stuff.
If you're gonna cross it from like hip hop to country, you probably want to go more of a stoner sludge or southern sludge. Like if you want to stay in the stoner doom,
right? But have like those aspects of music in it.
But you gotta have the jump,
right? Like
the shuffles.
So now everything's
like,
stoner doom sludge, and it's not anything specific. I even hear the crossover in it now, and a lot of stuff gets labeled this or that or whatever, and it's just like, well.
But overall, sometimes it doesn't even fit in the genre.
That's from my perspective, and they might call me a stick in the mud or old, and I'd be like, yep, totally. Totally stick in the mud, totally old, comfortable where I'm at, so not concerned that I have a different perspective than anyone else, and I don't think anyone should be concerned that they have a different perspective on this than anyone else. If we're all just playing music anyway in general, I don't think we should be very divisive about it, especially when we're even to the point of being like, well, I don't use genres. It's like, well, okay, but that's already divisive enough to say I don't and I do, so now we can't talk anymore, right? No, this is ridiculous. We're still gonna talk about, well, what do you think I don't do genres. Okay, what do you think about rap? Well, I don't like rap. It's like, well, you just did genres, dude. So what the fuck? So, don't pick it apart, because I'm gonna pick it apart with you, and I'll pick it apart. Not saying that anyone can do that. Anyone can be a pain in the ass. So it's like, well, now it's a kind of a palette of Stoner Doom, which used to be Stoner and Doom, has now become a palette of Stoner Sludge Doom that has aspects of so many other styles of music, like hip hop in it. I'd be like, no, but apparently now, yes.
Rock
so
or punk.
For me, it's like an evolution of it. It's kind of like D&D, lawful neutral half orc. No! Or whatever. Before you couldn't be certain characters in role-playing games. Now the rules are you can be a dragon, elf, wizard, sorcerer, angel, fairy, demon with who runs the bar in town. And it's like, that would never happen before, because all the humans would be like, what the fuck? Burn it! Witch hunt. Rush witch hunt. To back in the day, role-playing games
It's a little more simple.
were very simple. The elves hate the orcs. Now, the elves marry the orcs, and you have half-elf orc characters. Same with Stoner Doom. Before you had Stoner, you had Doom, and now you have the child of all the mixes of all the different things. So you can be crazy, goofy, weird, Zappa-y, and still call it Stoner Doom. I don't know, it's just,
All right.